All righty?
You guys ready for?
I pledge allegiance to
To the flag to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. We're at our 6 o'clock meeting, room 103, September 9th planning board meeting. We have a very limited agenda, so I'll get right into it. Our first article is at 6 o'clock, King Street Common, the zoning bylaw that we've all been working on. I think we have the latest and greatest. Rick and Chris have gone through everything. Are we pretty much, or do you have some changes to that as well? You're going to torture us with one more set of changes?
Good evening, Rick Freiberg from TEC. So there's actually no further changes from Chris's revisions that were sent out earlier. Really, there were just a couple of questions that he had that I just kind of wanted to draw your attention to.
Okay.
And if you'd like, I could kind of walk through very quickly a highlight of some of the changes since we met last week.
Okay.
So I think, starting at the purpose, you'll see some red text. And what that was incorporating some of the aquifer and water protection, water resources protection that's outlined in the form-based code, but was absent from this. So we just kind of added that in there. On the second page, we changed a couple of mays to shalls as it relates to the permitting process. And then you'll see a lot of comments on the right side under permitted uses. Most of those comments really have to do with a question of whether or not we really need to list major commercial use and major industrial use as permitted uses in the district. And the reason we listed them here is because, the zone applies to the entirety of the site. And the two existing IBM buildings, obviously, any reuse or redevelopment of those two buildings would certainly exceed the thresholds that are considered a major industrial or major commercial permit. So we left those two uses in there. Like we've said all along, we're not really sure what exactly the future plans are for that. It would likely be either, some major renovation to the building and reused as office, or potentially R&D space, or potentially some type of manufacturing use. But it would be something that would exceed the 50,000 square feet, and it would exceed the sewerage thresholds as well. So we left those couple things in there, and that's what a lot of the comments back and forth are about on the right side.
Okay.
We've added a note under the recreational uses that talks about drive-throughs. So, of course, in town, the only time that a drive-through is permitted is if it's part of a bank use. So we've added a note to clarify that. The concurrent granting of special permits really just has to do with making sure that you guys get to look at all the special permits at the same time, so that you can weigh, sort of the entirety of the criteria that's in front of the board. Some minor language changes that are in that master plan development approval section. And that deals with process as well. The next page gets into the development standards. And in the development standards, it talks about the different areas of the site, the different uses that are contemplated within the zone, and of course the dimensional requirements of each of those different areas. So the most language change occurs on letter H of the design standards, and that deals with a myriad of different uses that could be proposed. So this is one that we talked about last time. We take another shot at adding some more nuance. Previously, what was shown was up to 50 feet, I think, in building height, and that was sort of a blanket. What this does here is it breaks it into the different types of uses based on the use table. So there's separation for residential use buildings, which include mixed use. There's a separation for commercial buildings, institutional buildings, and accessory structures. So those are sort of all broken out with different allowable heights in each of them. And then any other building that's sort of not specified falls back to the form-based code. And then the next major change was dealing with the different exceptions that are sought from the form-based code. And one of the concerns last time was that due perhaps to economic pressures as the project gets underway, that there would be risk of sort of creating a strip development along the frontage, because it's cheaper, obviously, to build one building than it is two if they're the same size. And the way the form-based code is written is really for smaller parcels in this one. So the concern is, if we have a 1,000 feet of frontage on King Street, the way the code's written, we could kind of develop a 600-foot-long building, which is obviously not, what was intended for the project. So what we did here was come up with some language that basically allows us to work with the board to waive that requirement for the purpose of creating sort of open space, gathering areas within the village, and considering preservation of open space, for example, like the area next to the Tuttle House, that we don't want to use that length and then be required to build very long buildings when I think that really was never the intent. But again, it just sort of provides the planning board with discretion to help kind of shape how that front looks. And then the last of it was there's some changes that have to do with the in the very last section on the last page, the relationship to the Aquifer and Water Resources District. Just sort of strengthening the language there that talks about for any increase in impervious area, that basically all of that runoff is infiltrated on site, all that new runoff. So what that does, obviously, it just further promotes infiltration above and beyond what the state standards are. But this being in the Aquifer Protection District, it seems like it's a good place to encourage infiltration as much as we possibly can to help recharge the town's groundwater supply. There's also language in here that the board may require review by town council to make sure that not only the Mass DEP stormwater standards are met, but also the Littleton stormwater standards, and then these additional requirements that are placed on for increased infiltration as part of the project. Because there's sort of 3 layers there and there's increases the complexity of it, that's why we put in the part about town council sort of having a chance to review if the planning board wanted to bring them in as part of the process. So that's a high-level summary of the changes. Since we met last week, we had one meeting with sort of staff and the board, and then a few rounds of back and forth with town council, and we've arrived at this draft. There's no proposed changes to the draft, really just the things that we talked through now are just sort of explanations to some of the questions that were raised by town council. So I don't think there's a version 3 coming, unless I hear more feedback tonight. Thank you.
I'll ask the board if they have any questions or concerns. I'll start with Anna. You good with?
Thank you for the revisions, Rick. So I guess I would like to ask a little bit more clarity around why the need to change HA, which is the height of the buildings in the form-based code area. The residents, when we went through the process for form-based code through the revitalization roadmap, were fairly adamant that they didn't want anything higher than 2.5 stories. And given that, I just really think there's going to be a reluctance based on that particular sentiment. So if you could explain a little bit more about why you're seeking the 3 and 4 stories, like if you already have things in mind, it would probably be helpful to aid in the explanation.
Sure. Yeah. So so I think when the architects are really looking at the site and they're looking at how that front door presence will be, there's sort of a blending between what's there today and then the larger IBM buildings that are sort of set back in the back of the site, which are obviously much taller than 35 feet. So what's proposed in here basically talks about the mix of different uses and different heights being allowed for each of them. And the reason we thought it was important to have different heights for each of them was because I think the character and look of the buildings is going to change a little bit based on the function of the building. So if there's sort of a civic-minded building that's proposed, it would probably look a little bit different than one that was for mixed use. Our thought with mixed use right now is that we would potentially have ground floor retail, restaurant, amenity type things, second floor of office. So there's an element of live, work, play with the residential units sort of living above that office space. And the concept that the architects are working on is sort of a 2-level living. So it's a different apartment mix than you might find in sort of a standard multifamily development project where it's almost like row houses that are living above this sort of village environment. And that's why the request to go up to 4 if it's a mixed-use project. If it's not a mixed-use project, and if it's just commercial, we propose basically to stick with the form-based code, 2.5 stories, 35 feet. institutional, we requested 3 stories and 50 feet, just because again, that would sort of be the civic building. And I think there'd be a little more prominence to it. So even though it would only be 3 stories, it might be slightly taller, to sort of increase the presence. And that's sort of the reason for the different breakdowns of uses.
Okay. So thank you for that explanation. As you were talking about the 2-level of living, like with row houses, that would not go well during or under our senior residential development bylaw if you were to be building out, or if anybody were to be building out senior residences, because they need to be at one level. And so from that standpoint, that would be a concern. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about all of this. I don't know if any of the other board members have any comment on this.
I do. I'm trying to work it back into this diagram. You have the town square village cluster. I very much like that you set aside the Tuttle house, green space. So 50-foot tall buildings in the mixed use area. And I'd like to, remind people that, in the residential context, that's over 5 stories. I know you have to have higher floor-to-floors for commercial, higher floor-to-floors for office. I think it's great to have this mix. I actually like the idea of this, I don't know how you'd put it. I mean, the way you're describing it is a row house, development on top of a podium that has, the commercial and office. I sort of think I might like that. It's sort of interesting. However, I don't like the idea of defining it as just a general 50-foot height. I think we need more precise thing, because 50-foot height could allow a 5-story residential building. I guess the question is, would this zoning allow just a 5-story building in the mixed-use area? No. Yes or no?
No, so,
Okay.
so
It also
the,
says 3 stories. I don't know how you're gonna get the 5 with it. It says right there, 3 stories.
Well, it says 50 feet.
so,
3 stories or 50 feet.
Well, it says 4 stories.
for residential use buildings, it's 4 stories or 50 feet.
Institutional use buildings are 3 stories.
Yeah.
That's an office building, a R&D building, or,
Yes.
I'm concerned about that. And then, you have this future residential area, back to Anna's comment. I assume that's where this development that would be rich and deeply affordable housing would occur. How do we, how do we do that in this document? We're allowing 6-story or 75 feet, which I don't support. But the problem is, it's always a problem with this. The form-based code is an attitude that sort of takes, well, do whatever you want, but you have to make it look like this. And we're sort of going away from that with this document. We're just giving general heights and stories, and we're going also away from, as Anna pointed out, what we had a huge planning process that people rejected these taller buildings. So if we have these taller buildings, what are we, how, I'm just concerned. I think under certain circumstances, like in the what you just described, where you said you have a mixed use, and then the upper is, we could maybe refer to that as 3.5 stories. Or, and then there's the issue of, the actual, what define, I guess we have to go back to our definitions, but what, I think in Littleton, the definition of height is from the upper wall plate.
Half story on the third, you're talking about third floors? Or
Well, or
Definition,
fourth
right?
floors. I'm just saying, what is this, are these all flat roof buildings that are actually built up to the, the upper limit?
No,
And
so-
I'm not saying that's
They're
bad, but,
Aren't they peaked roofs? This
Yeah.
is the top of the peak.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I had a chance to finish. But, so to your point about the form-based code, I think our intent here is not to throw away the form-based code.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were looking, obviously, when we first started, we said there's a lot of great work that's been done. Our intention is to sort of build from what was all the work that was previously achieved by the board. So basically, within H, right, these are pertaining to all buildings within 255 feet of King Street. So that's your current form-based code. The only exceptions that we're seeking from the form-based code really have to do with height, which also, sort of encapsulates B, which is the floor-to-floor height requirements for the different types of uses that we might have. A requirement about where residential doors would be on the first floor. And basically giving the board the ability at its discretion to waive the 60-foot facade build-out just because the frontage is so long. Other than that, all the architectural standards, all the requirements for, that exist in the form-based code are also required under this bylaw.
so I guess my own, so then it would come down to, when I circle, institutional use buildings shall have a maximum height of 3 stories or 50 feet, whatever is less. Now, I could accept that form-based code did not, since it was based on small parcels, did not take into account that kind of use. So maybe it's appropriate. I don't like the residential use definition. And I think we could do better that narrows it down to what you described. Because I think that, that would be appealing to people, to have their little townhouse in the air.
So I went kind of fast, and I didn't really read word for word everything that's in there. Maybe I'll take a step back, though. So, for residential use buildings containing a mix of uses, i.e. Mixed use, which is a definition for a use that already exists in the bylaw, containing commercial uses on the street level, and then this is an add-on, I think, from Chris, but, or street level and lower floors, and residential uses on the upper floors will have a maximum height of 4 stories or 50 feet, whichever is less. So, if it doesn't meet that definition of a mixed-use building, where it has commercial uses on the lower floors, residential uses on the top 2 floors, let's say it was just strictly a residential building, multifamily residential building, it would actually be classified under 4, excuse me.
No, it would be
No.
classified under 1, where it says maximum height of 4 stories or 50 feet.
No,
It says
No, 'cause
mixed-
that's
only if it
mixed
contains
use.
mixed use. It would
Oh,
kick,
containing mixed use,
Yeah.
okay.
it would kick down to all other buildings shall be governed by Article 30, which is the form-based code.
Well,
So what we're trying to do in that language was say that you could only do the 4 stories if it was a mixed-use building. If it's not a mixed-use building, like if it was like, let's say, a purely residential building, a multifamily residential building, it would fall back to Article 30, which is the form-based code.
See, I'll just jump in real quick. See, this one here, this big building here, this is what he's trying to accomplish. And I have no problem with buildings that are gonna stand out that are bigger than that. There might be a farmer's market in the middle and some residential higher up above it to get it, in order to be able to do something that's not all 2.5 stories. Or this could be government offices or something like that. I get that you need the 4 stories for this, so I don't have a problem with that aspect
So
of it.
if that's what we're talking about, then being able to identify that a municipal building in that space could be 4 stories, that I think folks might be more accepting of, but to just kind of leave it as, at any point in the future of development, this is what could be.
But supposing he wanted to have an open floor plan inside of it, no
Right.
first and second floor. That's the only way you're gonna be able to do a building like that. Maybe you
Like a
want-
food, like if you
Like a
wanted to have a
food court.
food loft or,
But did you hear what I said?
I
If
heard
it's a
what you said.
municipal building, fine, I
But
think that.
what
that
happens
would
if
be
that's
okay.
not?
yeah,
Suppose-
why would we want a municipal building in that area?
Well, we want town, if we could.
So I'm just going back to what town had said. So if we would like to be able to receive positive comments and for folks to be more accepting of this, I think that's going to require a lot of discussion, and we're going to be using up a lot of airtime discussing why we as a town approved 2.5 stories, and now we're going above that. And based off of just the few folks that I've talked to, they very adamantly said, we don't want anything tall. So.
This is the first whack at form-based
Yes.
coding. Okay? This is
Well-
a big one. I think if you leave, the more you leave in, the more flexibility you have. And it's gonna be up to us to decide ultimately, when it comes back to the planning board for the master plan, whether or not, just because it's in there doesn't mean we have to like it and approve it. At least if it's in there, we have a chance of looking at it and deciding whether we want all these buildings the same height, or if we want a bigger building in the middle of them, a massing of it,
Right.
something. That's the
So,
reason I say leave it in there.
And I don't mind leaving it in there either, but I think Anna's point is, this is twice as tall as what the town has. And you can bring people along if you give an example. And you may have to do a quick, section and elevation of one of these mixed-use buildings.
Yeah.
The mixed-use buildings is a new thing.
Yeah.
It's new. I mean, there's not many of these buildings that have been built up to now until we've, And then in the institutional, I sort of, institutional use, the 3 stories may not bother me, but if the entire site was built out as institutional use, it would not be good.
Mhm.
And we don't have any, should there be some, wordage saying institutional use within this part of the zoning can only, be 20% of the square footage proposed, or your intentions are good, but who knows? Someone may buy this project and not have your intentions and just look at these words, and they're looking at words, they're not looking at images that are in your mind. So I think we need some more specificity. I'm coming around to the idea of having some of these buildings as this institutional use, whatever that is, or,
What do you mean by that? Do you mean right along King Street? Because I would hate for any of those buildings right along King Street to be institutional or
well,
municipal.
that's my point.
I would much rather see, and I thought the vision was always that would be more mixed use right up against King Street.
But right now, the mixed-use buildings can be 50 feet, which is that size. So I think we're being too general here.
so it sounds like we need to think on that for a minute. If I have one other comment, and that is going to the item under
The other thing too.
that same section H, D, where we're talking about the 60% minimum facade. So one of the things that, that I wanted to broach about that is the form-based code, and what the town wanted was all the shops, quote, along the sidewalk, right? And so if you think about a development like South Acton, where you go down the long block, that's sort of what I have in my head, and I think you guys do too. So having a long block, as you said, a 600-foot long building, well, first of all, I would veto that, but the point being that I think that South Acton type of community is what we're looking for. And so there are long stretches of facade, which is fine. My concern is that if we take that away, then folks could start to have buildings that are pushed back. And that's not part of what we want.
No.
And then it does start to look like a strip mall, because, lo and behold, you've got the buildings off in the back versus up in the front.
No.
So that's my concern about taking that away. And I think that the fact that as you drive by, you're paying attention to the road, but still you see all these nice buildings and, oh, there's a little space that's green and whatnot. And if you're walking, well, seeing this lovely new village is going to be far better than walking by and seeing an empty parking lot and two buildings. So I'm actually a bit reluctant to removing that or
May-
fiddling
may-
or
may-
waiving that 60% minimum facade. So that's my input on that.
Would it be okay if I maybe further sort of elaborated on that?
Sure.
So, yeah, so,
Certainly.
so the intention on that one is the form-based code actually has a minimum required facade build-out. So, what that means basically is the form-based code tells you in there how far the buildings have to be from the street. We're not seeking an exception from that. The buildings are going to be at the street, and we're not looking for an exemption from that. So the buildings won't be in the back, so to speak. What this is trying to do, and it's at the planning board's discretion, it's not a blanket waiver, is this is trying to allow for the opportunity. So, if you took the entire frontage of the lot, which includes the Tuttle House and it includes the green space that's next to the Tuttle House, the form-based code actually requires us to build a minimum of 60% of the site at that front setback line.
Right.
So that would be, again, I'll just use the round numbers, and let's say it's 1,000 feet of frontage. It would be 600 feet of frontage of buildings on the street like that, which is a lot. So we're not seeking to push the buildings back into the site. What we're looking to do is sort of invite people in, because it is such a long expanse. Allow for the opportunity to create sort of village gathering areas, green space, pedestrian connections that sort of cut through this. But for us to do that, I mean, I think there would almost be no way that we could meet the 60% minimum when we're also trying to preserve the green space and the Tuttle House, just the way the math works out.
But can't we take the Tuttle House frontage away from, I mean, we're talking about the frontage in the Town Square Village cluster, which is not, which is, I don't know what it is, but this diagram that you have here, while it doesn't conform specifically with form-based code, but I don't expect it to. I mean, it's really okay. I mean, it's, the buildings are forward, they're varied. But anyway, so I guess I'm not as concerned about that. And as long as we do have some, because it's allowing a waiver, it's not saying that it has to be granted.
Yeah, at the board's
So,
discretion, yeah.
I would say, I would actually ask you, Jeff, because I think you were the one who brought this up at the last meeting, concerned about the 60%. So the way that I look at this is that it's 60% of buildings up front, it's 40% of open space and anything else that isn't a building front. And that's a little bit over 50%, and that seems very doable. Even on that long stretch, it seems very doable.
Okay.
So that's the way that I'm perceiving it.
Um,
And from the standpoint of pushing the buildings back, my thought on that was that then that particular facade, if you will, doesn't get counted in the calculation because it's pushed back, right?
Correct, yeah.
And so if it's allowed to not be up front and pushing it back, that means we're going to have a lot less facade up front, and that's not the intention. So those are the two concerns that I have in the document right now. So, Mark, I'll send it back to you.
Okay. Are you, so if we get back to the building heights, the 4 stories, 40 feet, 50 feet, do you want to list, give us a better idea of what would actually be in there? Maybe it would be easier for us for the next meeting to, if we're going to leave it in there, to give us an idea what your thoughts are for the bigger buildings.
Yeah,
That way it
Yeah.
might be easier more palatable if people know what it's actually going to be.
yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing too is there was a discussion about renderings, to kind of bring these things to life. Those are already being developed.
Yeah, and they don't have to be elaborate, they just have to show with a figure on it, a section to the building showing retail, office, some, residential townhouse thing, and what that might look like, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we will have to convince people. Now, I guess a general question is, and then what is it? Is it 50 feet or is it 45 feet? Or, what do you actually need? Commercial might need 15, office might need 12,
And 10, 10 or
two-story
something,
residential might be 20. And anyway, so.
Yeah, it's
and-
47.
And whether that two-story element could be considered, the second floor could be considered a half-story. And that gets closer to, while still being pretty interesting. And then, I really feel like you have to start labeling the parking garage on these drawings.
Yes.
It's a pretty big piece of the Town Square Village cluster.
Wait, before you go to parking garage, can I ask something else about the height?
Yeah.
If you were at street level, you know how IBM sits back and up?
Yeah.
How high would IBM be if it was at, wait, what am I trying to say here? All right. When you're at street level, you're looking up at IBM because it sits up.
How high is IBM?
So, yeah, how high is IBM?
Yeah.
Is that like 4 stories from street level, 5 stories, 6 stories?
I think it's probably the equivalent of about a 5-story building from street
Okay.
level, because, IBM's a pretty tall building floor to floor. I think it probably has, roughly 15 feet or so floor to floor height, so it's probably between 45 and 50 feet tall.
Okay.
And on top of that, it's also perched up, as you
Right.
know, maybe let's say 10 or 12 feet from the street.
Okay, so my point here is, if you think about that, the site itself, to put a 4-story building in front of it, it won't look
It's
really
not
like
gonna
a
be-
4-story
Yeah, but that
building.
four-story building is not 20 feet away from King Street. There's a big difference. And the other thing about the IBM building is that one part of it is up, but the other part of it is not. There are actually 2 separate buildings that have 2 separate heights.
Right.
So I take your point. I mean, I think with, the way you've shown the parking, it's probably going to work out better there than anywhere else because you have the grade change. 35 feet, I'd like to know, is that, 35 feet would allow almost
3 stories. Yeah.
well, 3 or more, depending on, whether it goes down.
Well, none of this is going down, right? No.
Well, you could have a parking garage that has
Yeah, but
a
this is-
half level down.
But this isn't, this is all the
No,
front.
but I'm talking about this parking garage.
No.
But is anything going to be on top of the parking garage?
So, as it relates to the parking garage specifically, we have not spent a lot of time designing it, because our goal is sort of, let's develop the plan for the front of the site.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to get us into the uses and the parking requirements that are needed to sort of support that. The space that we feel like makes sense is sort of pressed up against those IBM buildings, is the place to do the parking, so that, because to Anna's point, you don't want to have the parking in the front
Right.
of the site, it has to be in the back.
Right.
Right, so that's how that works. And because of the grade change, I think we can hide it in there nicely. The
Well,
goal.
you're not going to hide it from, the front, but,
Well-
I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think that's a good spot for it.
Yeah, and so our thought is that between using the buildings at the street to screen the visibility of the garage, and then also using softer methods of screening like landscaping, feature walls, accent walls, living
Why
walls,
wouldn't you
all
build
that
on
stuff.
top of it, though, as well?
I think because they only want to keep it 1 story.
Well, it's not, they're allowing 35 feet, which could be
Not for
almost
the
4
parking
stories.
garage.
Yes, they are. They're
So-
allowing a 35-foot height for the parking garage.
Yeah, and
It
here,
says-
it just matched the height from that's allowed in the form-based code. It could be less.
Well, no, I think the form-based code said 2 stories. So, if we.
Could you put something on top of it, not forget it, but could it be like, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out, like a dog park? Or use that top area, make that useful?
I
A
think.
sports field.
Oh, God, there's not another one.
Anyway,
Just think of all the balls being tossed off the top of the parking garage,
I
too.
want to, Violet, do you have any questions or concerns?
Well, I haven't decided. I'm thinking about West Concord as a streetscape, and I'm thinking about the Main Street and Air, which is very, crappy 1-story buildings because they back up to the railroad on one side, and nice 4-story buildings on the other side. And it works there, sort of. I mean, but, trying to recreate that, I'm not quite sure, that we could get an architect to recreate that 19th century facade. So I'm kind of undecided, but I'm really concerned about the height because the houses across the street are all one story for the most part. And I don't know quite how to balance it, so I'm up in the
All
air.
right, well, we have to move this along for October 9th. When's our next meeting?
7th, I believe.
October 7th. Okay.
The warrant ends up closing on Tuesday. But, through the bylaw, you're able to submit it to the warrant, and at the public hearing, you're able to continue to make refinements and, even propose, say, vote to recommend to approve with the recommendation that section IA be amended to be this, and, it's a handout at town meeting.
Right.
If there's a couple things that you're still sort of struggling with, I think at that public hearing, you'd be able to work your way through. Some of the things that at least I heard, I think it's always beneficial to have some sort of flexibility that the planning board is in control of. And that's where that at the board's discretion is pretty important, because they have to make that case.
Right.
And you don't have to go with it. I just put up the site for everyone. That distance from corner to corner is 1,470 feet. That 60%, once they go and design it, it may not be an issue at all. But there could be then some things that come out, maybe they want more. And that's where ultimately they'd have to convince you, and I think it's always beneficial to make sure that the planning board has discretion that it thinks is warranted. It's not something that they can just request and basically force through. It's written in a way that really gives you the authority to grant that or not. And the other things, it ends up being, I think, a little bit more of a challenge, and with the height for the residential building. I did have a question as far as you titled it residential use buildings, but then really referred to mixed use. Just why, and then you say, well, if it was all residential, then you go back to all other buildings shall be governed by Article 30. Why wouldn't I just be buildings containing a mix of uses, mixed use containing, and then continue on rather than just having it residential use buildings? I think it confuses, I think for a lot of people, what that really means. And if there is some sort of struggle that the board is having, you could have that same process, that maybe there's a case that they could show you where at the board could grant at its discretion where maybe something works, rather than thinking, well, I'm going to imagine every single mixed-use building is then 4 stories across. Architectural variation, may make one design look good and meet that, but then another design could be absolutely horrendous and be deemed out of character. So if that's also something that's a struggle for the board, is there something that then allows for some form of discretion to come in?
So we have this through the efforts of a lot of people in this room, this form-based code thing, that is very specific about size and height and this and that and the other thing. And we're seen to be pushing it aside for this site. Regardless of what you say, that's what's happening. And we don't have anything to replace it that has the specificity or, a way to give people comfort about what's going to happen instead of it. That's my concern.
Well, yeah, but I think the issue is, when we did form-based coding, we never thought we were gonna get 1,000 square.
I'm not
feet.
saying
Well, I
that
disagree.
isn't, that this isn't appropriate for this site. I'm just saying, to get an approval for it, we may have to dig a little deeper in showing what it actually.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you could tell us why you need what uses would warrant putting it on a 4-story, maybe we can get around it that way.
Yeah, and we're happy to do that. I think, I hope it isn't coming off, because we're spending a lot of time talking about just a couple of the exceptions that are requested. But of the entirety of the form-based code, it's actually just a couple of exceptions that are being sought. Again, there's no exceptions being sought to any of the requirements for canopies, awnings, overhangs, entry gardens, how close the buildings are to the street, the architectural styling of the buildings, the recommendations for roof pitches. None of that stuff is being requested to be changed. Really, it's about these just couple of exceptions, and the couple of exceptions we feel are really related to the size of the property and the scale of the buildings that are behind it.
But they happen to be two of the foundational elements of form-based code, so I think that's one of the reasons why there's concern and you're hearing it. And I would like to say for the third meeting now, that I don't like the parking garage there. And being able to put it somewhere else on this humongous property is something that I've asked for, and it hasn't happened yet. So, given the fact that a parking garage isn't even allowed in the form-based code unless it's 400 feet, unless it's in a 400-foot deep property, that shouldn't even be there. So I feel like it's being disregarded, and I know you said that you guys haven't paid a lot of attention to it, but in case you haven't heard, it is kind of important to us. So hopefully, as you come up with your final designs.
On Anna's comments, the biggest grade change is from this side of the building to this parking lot. And it's actually almost probably 2 stories. If you did consider another location, that might be it. So the other thing that plays into this that is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not in this document is anything to do about density or parking requirements, or now it's not the thing now to design around parking, but, and I would just assume that you wouldn't build something that you couldn't, park. But density is an issue.
Yeah, so
especially with this big blob here, the future residential area, because you are allowing 75-foot high buildings, which I do not support, and you could have 5 or 6 75-foot high buildings there if you had the parking. I think you go down Westford Road and you go into Chelmsford, and there's some just basic 40Bs that are these tall frame, terrible looking buildings on a podium of parking. And if that was built back there, I don't think I wouldn't be happy, and I don't think people would be happy. So why are we not having any density? I mean, we talk about impervious, which is just where the development meets the ground. You do have limitations on, wastewater disposal, which would there's a lot of factors that will limit this. But could we consider a unit limit or a square footage limit that anticipates some kind of, we already have 500,000 square feet of office commercial. Why can't we begin to talk about those numbers in this area here?
Yeah,
And
so
what would those numbers be?
Yeah, so in that section, so E deals with density.
Okay.
And the proposed density is 20 units per acre, which was from the 40R.
Okay.
I think the other thing too, I'm happy we're talking about it, because I think there's some attention that I could draw to it. The difference, I think, between buildings that would be built here and, let's say, like your typical 40B building, like that you were referring to, I think if you go to section I, you get into the design criteria and the requirements for the buildings that are in the back of the site. And those deal with pedestrian bike accommodations, screening from public ways, access, but probably more importantly, down towards the bottom, you get to parking lot design, building facades, general architectural style, building massing, roofs, building entrances, windows, building materials, porches, arcades, and canopies, towers, cupolas, and chimneys, general landscaping, streetscape requirements, and the like. So a lot of those architectural standards that affect the way that the buildings will look were borrowed from the stuff that you guys have already done when you were doing the architectural standards for the 40R district. I think that's an important thing to say, just because if you were to look at this building and the requirements that are in here for the traditional New England style architecture, the requirements for all these sort of building features, it's going to look very different than what you would see in a 40B building.
So you say. I don't
That's,
know.
I mean, it's required. It's, I mean, it's,
Well, you have, I don't mean to, I'm just,
No,
saying,
no.
I'm looking at the document, and I'm not looking at, inside your intentions, but you have general architecture style, simpler forms that are clearly discernible are favored over unnecessary complexity. Well, that could mean that just a big slab of building. And that comes directly from this document. So,
well, it's further. So like G, for example, building facades that are more than 50 feet wide shall be broken into a series of smaller elements or bays. So these words, these standards, are actually from the language that's been developed, by the board. I think with a lot of these questions in mind, I think this was developed with a consultant that the board brought on as well.
And we did have a height discussion during those discussions, and it was not 75 feet.
Well, anyways, we've hashed that all out. I think we need to move this along, get a final version for the October meeting. If you want to get back to us with what you think will go into taller buildings, make the minor modifications that you want to do. We'll continue this till October 7th, where we'll have a public meeting with everybody, and we'll finalize this. And if we have to do a handout at town meeting, if we decide we want to stick with the shorter heights and things like that, we can always do it through a handout. But I just want to move this along. And just one more thing, we keep looking at this. This was done the very first thing they ever showed us.
Well, no, they've made a change. They did this.
No, the title house is always there.
No, but they took it away. Oh, whatever.
Well, I'm just saying, this was a
Yeah.
placemat to show you where things were gonna
Yeah.
put, not
It's
in
space planning. That
the
was
space
it.
plan.
Yeah.
That's this is all gonna be entirely different by the time the master plan comes before us, if and when this gets moving forward. Anyway, so we'll continue this,
At least there would be something procedurally that I think would have to happen, because if you're just continuing the discussion until the next meeting, I think that the board would have to vote to submit the article to the warrant. Because with the warrant closing, I mean, we can
So we have to
place
vote.
it on, but as far as, town administrator and the select board can place it on, but ideally that the board would be voting to put it, place the article on the warrant, that the public hearing on the draft bylaw, I believe, is already scheduled for, I think you said the October 7th meeting. And that would be the time where then some of these could be hashed out a little bit more and defined in the form of a recommendation.
so we need a motion to put this.
Well, I have a question real quick before the motion.
Sure.
If we do that by voting to send the article to the warrant, that doesn't imply, or infer, I should say, acceptance.
You're talking about acceptance by the planning board?
Yes.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
No, we're trying to put something forward that we think will be supported by the town. And
that's-
I
and
think a
that's-
lot of our comments are coming from that point of view.
Yeah.
We went through a brutal 40R process where it was utterly rejected, utterly, completely. And there were other issues, we know there were other issues.
Yeah.
But I think we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that's where I've been through brutal issues where the Wayland Town Center project, when I was there, we actually submitted an article to the warrant, and then the planning board itself voted not to recommend that article. And then we took it up the next town meeting. I'm by no means recommending going through that process. But it is important to make sure that you nail things down and make sure that you're comfortable, because ultimately, the planning board has to provide a recommendation to town meeting.
So, unless you want to meet again on this, which I don't really think we need to, I think we send the motion, we fine tune it on the October 7th, and if we have to change it and put a handout in, it's not a big deal. So, again, someone will make the motion to instruct the select board to put this on the this rough draft to the warrant article for our warrant for special town meeting on October 23rd.
Fifth, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just remember that means that this language is what will be mailed to people. Is that right, Joe?
No.
No.
We still have a little bit of
You
time.
do? Okay.
For the warrant report to go out.
Do we know what that date is?
September 27th, I believe.
Okay, but we're not meeting again, so this would be the language that goes out in the mail.
That would be one of the things, unless the board scheduled a meeting in between. But, I think some of these issues, at least what I heard is that there's 3 or 4 subsections that you're really talking about. The density, the maximum height, and the exceptions. That at least seems reasonable to have that
Maybe we should-
discussion and to propose amendments as part
Maybe
of
we
a
should put it out
recommendation.
to see what kind of feedback comes back.
I agree with you.
Yeah, put it out as is and see
And
what
then
comes
at the
back.
town meeting, if we go there and we say, well, it was 50, but now it's 45, or,
So why don't we
4 stories or
See what-
3 stories.
put it
Has
out?
this ever been done? But would it be possible in those sections that you just mentioned, Joe, to identify that the board is still taking this section under advisement, or some language like that?
When we-
Because my biggest concern is that people will see that, people who do not engage, because they are just busy people, will open that up and they'll start looking and they'll say, no, what do you mean we're gonna have, blah, blah, blah. I'm
So
just
within
asking.
within the town meeting reports, we always have notations that provide background information for the 4 residents who received that report. We even include motions, and we have had articles where we said the motion is pending, and we've identified that there's a public hearing, and we can identify, like, the planning board is gonna be holding a public hearing on this date.
We haven't
and
endorsed
identify
this yet.
things,
Right, but-
So.
But we're agreeing to send it along to put it on the warrant. That's all we're doing. We haven't endorsed it yet, to answer your question.
Yep.
Right.
So why don't we send it along, see what kind of feedback we get, and if we have to change it October 7th, when people will be here, we'll see what happens then, okay? So I need a motion from somebody.
We'll work it out.
Unless you want to have another meeting, which I do not.
No.
And it would just be
No, we'd
rehashing
just-
all
yeah.
that stuff,
You want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to request that the select board put this on the town warrant. Is
For
that what-
October
For October
25th.
25th.
You want to second it?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Jeff?
I said aye, very,
Anna?
very quietly.
Okay. We put it on, we'll work on the changes, get us a list of what you think would go in a bigger building, why you need the bigger building, and we'll go from there. Okay, we have that one.
Could we get a version of this without the edits or the comments? I mean, or you'll make a version to send out without this format?
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah, you just want the clean
the
version?
clean, that's what
Yeah.
everyone will be seeing, and we should be able to look at that too.
Yeah, I have a version of it this, I could forward to
Okay.
Joe to circulate, yeah.
Great.
Okay. Okay, great. So moving back to 550 King Street again, we have a public hearing for transfer of ownership of the aquifer water resource district special permit for change of proprietorship. This is in the request from the lender, I believe, to make sure that, go ahead, you might as well tell us what we're doing it for.
Hi, I'm Charlene Taylor from Lincoln Property Company, representing Hudson Advisors, and the building is for sale. They would like to transfer the aquifer permit to the buyer with no changes, just a name change,
Just a change of ownership.
just a change of ownership.
Sorry, and just so that I can get it for the record, you said your name was?
Charlene Taylor.
Okay. And with,
I'm with Lincoln Property Company,
okay.
the management company for Hudson Advisors, who's the owner.
Board have any questions for Ms. Taylor about this?
No.
Hang on.
So, I mean, the key finding is number 4, which the sale transaction does not include any change in the use of the property not otherwise currently permitted. So in its present state, when you're transferring this, where, you know, there may be some changes in the future when there's future development, but for now, this is just for this purpose of this
For
transaction.
the sale,
Yeah.
just for the sale. Anyone else, any questions?
I looked through my notes. I don't have any comments. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the special permit application for the transfer of ownership
Second.
from, from USFR Title King Street to, I believe it's, who's it going to? Is it going to?
550 King
LLC.
Street.
50 King Street, okay. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Oh, we're flying now. The 640 acceptance of Plnbrd Lane. I spoke with Anthony earlier. I've spoken with Mr. Kennard about it, and I told him that we would put it on the warrant and that we would not act on it unless everything was done on it. And he assured me that before the October 25th town meeting, everything should be all done on that so that it will be in its entirety ready for town meeting. So that's where we're gonna leave it. Okay. 6:45 public hearing, consolidated, you're gonna leave.
I'm leaving.
Goodbye.
So,
Adios.
so on Bluebird Way, we don't need to vote on it or anything else? It's,
We're just sending it off to town meeting. We're voting to put it on the warrant article.
right, but don't we have to do that?
So, sorry, I was making changes to the decision. Just a quick question. I think as far as voting to recommend to be placed on the warrant, I think we're still waiting for a couple verification of items. So it just becomes a question as far as, say, voting to recommend to place it on the warrant, contingent on Green International signing off on as-built plans and final inspections of infrastructure.
I actually thought we did that last meeting. I thought we voted to put it on the warrant subject to everything being done. I could be
I think that
wrong.
was one of the main questions, whether it was
All gonna be done.
voted or not.
Okay. All right, so then to make it easier, then why don't we vote on it? Subject to everything being finished and a satisfactory report from Green Engineering that everything's all done there. And we'll entertain the motion to accept the town way at town meeting. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to put it on the warrant for October 25th.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. My mistake. I thought we'd already done that, to be honest with you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. 6:45, consolidated public hearing, 160 Air Road, amend adult use marijuana establishment retail and water resource district special permit. We have a letter of understanding or an agreement with, there it is, between the party that decision, the party that appealed our decision to allow the use at 160 Air Road. Christine, you can sit down real quick if you want. I don't think we're going to ask you anything, but you can definitely sit there. So we have everyone have a copy of the rough draft that Maren made for us?
Mr. Chair, do we need to read the public hearing notice?
Do we have it? Do we have the public hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. You have it in front of you? All right, why don't you read it then?
Read it?
Sure.
Consolidated public hearing, amend adult use marijuana establishment, retail and water resource district special permits for 160 Ayer Road, Unit 4. Town of Littleton Planning Board will hold a consolidated public hearing on Thursday, September 9th, 2021, at 6:45 PM in Room 103 of Town Hall, 37 Shattuck Street, to consider the application to amend special permits pursuant to MGL Chapter 40A and the Code of the Town of Littleton zoning. The application is to amend the January 2021 adult use marijuana establishment, retail, and water resource district special permits and site plan modification under sections 173-16 through 173-19, 173-61 through 173-64, and 173-194 through 173-202 of the Code of the Town of Littleton zoning. Property location, 160 Ayer Road, Unit 4, Assessors Map R22, Parcel 1-1. Applicant, Christine Nordhaus. Owner, Athena Assets, LLC. The applicant is seeking to amend adult use marijuana establishment, retail, and water resource district special permits for a marijuana retail use at this site. Application and plans can be viewed online at the town website, www.littletonma.org, or at the planning board and town clerk's office by appointment. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the proposed plan should appear at the time and place designated or provide comment by September 7th, if possible, to m2hill@littletonma.org or Post Office Box 1305, Littleton, Mass. 01460. Please feel free to call the planning board office at 978-540-2425 with any questions. Bartlett Harvey, clerk.
Thank you. All right, so we have the agreement. I just want to read a couple of sections of it first. The determination and findings, following the public hearing on this amendment proposal, the planning board made the following additional determinations regarding the adult use marijuana application, noticing the proposed amendment. Egress is adequate to accommodate police and fire protection. Roads, water, drainage are not impacted or adversely affected. Visual compatibility is unchanged. No current or expected threat to the environment, given all activities within the building. No waste removal or storage inside and removed as necessary. No significant nuisance hazard or congestion will be created. There will be no substantial harm to the neighborhood or degradation from the intent of the zoning bylaw. And then here's the additional comments. The applicant shall post the side access ways with signs indicating no parking. Violators will be towed at their own expense, visible in both directions, and shall maintain an arrangement with the property owners, a reputable private towing company, and abutters at 168 Air Road, such that the affected abutting property owners may arrange to have violators towed at the violators' expense. The travel way for the vehicles entering and exiting the retail establishment will be limited to one way in and one way out, entering the front of the building and exiting the rear, and posted as such. The applicant shall hire traffic patrol officers wherever warranted, and the applicant shall apply for use all reasonable efforts to attain a second curb cut into the parking lot on the east side of the building in the event that traffic impairs delivery to tenants at 168 Air Road. For the purposes of this condition, the requirement to apply for a second curb cut shall be triggered upon receipt by the Littleton Police Department for 2 or more complaints within the 10-year period. Those are the conditions that were agreed to in order for the appeal to be dropped. Does the board have any questions or concerns?
On the additional conditions, I think this is a common sense thing, but there are some spelling errors that we should, under 20, violators should be violators.
Yeah.
Under 21, and existing in the rear should be exiting in the rear. And under 23, it says within a 1 and then 10-year period. I don't know if that means it's a 1-year period or a 10-year period. A 10-year period seems not really the thing to do.
Okay.
And one other typo in January at the very top of page 2.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we should assume that item 23 is a 1-year period,
Okay.
and the other things are just spelling.
Yeah. Maren probably did this 5 seconds before she was
I'm sure-
walking
I'm
around.
sure.
Sorry, I'm actually making changes as you talk.
Right.
I got the violators, I got the January, what was the other one you,
Then 21, the existing in the rear should be exiting in the rear.
Yeah, exiting, yeah, it should be exiting.
okay.
And then number 23, 1-year period instead of 10.
So basically, the gist of this was to make sure there's signage in the front, making
Sure.
sure nobody parks there. And if traffic became an issue, that the applicant would seek a second way into the parking lot further down at their expense. That was it's basically it in a
So
nutshell.
I had a question because of the way that number 20 reads. It says, "The applicant shall post the side access way with signs." Just saying side access, it doesn't really say directionally where related to the business or the site.
It should be
So-
the entrance access
Yeah,
way.
it shouldn't be the side
It shouldn't
access.
be that side, it should be entrance access way, right there as you come in.
They don't want people
Parking right there. That was his
on the-
biggest concern of the whole thing, that people would park right as you came in. So it
Okay.
shouldn't be the side, it
Well,
should
the
be the
language should be
entrance.
clearer then about that in terms of, because it says it shall post the side access way. So I was thinking, well, is it the side of the building that they're talking
Yeah,
about or
that's a good
someplace
point.
else?
No, it's the entrance access way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes it much clearer. And if we could have that in the decision, that would be good.
Sorry, if you don't mind repeating, that, so
It-
that was under what condition?
Number 20, it should be the applicant shall post at the entrance access way signage indicating no parking, violators will be towed at their own expense, visible in both directions.
So, as I recall, as you turn into the whole site, there's a very long, narrow road that keeps going back. So that's the area where they want
Yes.
the signs?
Right.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
And, Mark, it sounded like you actually had that written down.
Well, no, I just read it.
Oh, okay.
You want me to read it again to you?
One more time, just so I make sure that,
The applicant shall post at the entranceway signs indicating no parking, violators will be towed at their own expense,
okay.
visible in both directions.
And when we say at the entranceway, is it truly just at the entrance?
It's
or-
truly
or-
at the entrance. It's
or-
not all the way down. It's just to
Okay.
the entranceway going into the property.
Okay,
No
I
parking.
just want to make sure we get it right so that there are no more issues for the applicant.
Okay. Anything else? Christine, do you want to say anything, or are you good? Good, okay. Board have any other questions?
Nope.
Great, so then I'll entertain a motion to approve the amended special permit.
I so move.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we are done. Thank you all for coming.
And Jeff,
I'll
you-
entertain a motion to, no, that's good, Nicola, I think.
Jeff, did you second that?
Yes, I did. No, wait, I moved.
You moved, okay, I have it backwards, and you seconded it.
Yes.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn till October 7th.
Well, we have our retreat on September 30th.
Okay, let's
Oh, yeah, we need to make sure Maren
make
sends
sure
out
Maren
that.
reminds us, yeah.
Okay, okay. Yes, dear. Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Want to get the
I'm gonna-
recorder?